that. So I'm Nelson Dodge, by the way, which I'll get into that here in a minute. I forgot what I was going to say just now, but anyway, let's get going with this, and this will cover all the bases. I know what I was going to say. I've got about 40 slides here, which is a lot. So I'm going to power through this real quick, and so we do have some time for questions and discussion. You can pick up on details, and I can make the presentation available for your review later to get things out of it. But I'll talk about the book too, because it's all in the book that kind of this is based on. So as I said, I'm Nelson Dodge, and I am president of Church Keyboard Center, which is the global organ group representative in Southern California. I've been the dean for the LA AGO chapter the last 4 years, just completing that the end of June. And the word is already out that I have actually been elected as the regional counselor for the West region for the next couple of years. So that'll be a new adventure for me. Before I was in the organ business, I was the executive director of the New West Symphony, which is one of the regional symphony orchestras based in Los Angeles. I did that for about 5 years, and I only mention that because symphony orchestras have to raise a lot of money, and a lot of what I learned and going to share came from that experience. So as a Church Keyboard Center, I represent the Rogers, Johannes, and Custom Monarch digital organ brands. I have also created a corollary organization called Modern Organ Design Associates. Under that label, we are focusing more on doing pipe and custom organs in collaboration with the Schluter Pipe Organ Company in Alabama. Some of you probably know that. So as far as my fundraising background and why I even think about this or talk about this relative to organs is, like I said, it comes a lot from my experience running the symphony, where we had to raise about $1.5 million annually to fund a $2.5 million budget. That's just a very typical proportion for symphony orchestras. About a third of the revenue comes from ticket sales, and 2/3 comes from fundraising. And compared to what I do now and fundraising for organs, when you're a performing arts organization like a symphony, all that money that gets raised, and you're sitting talking to donors and asking them to give you $100,000 this season and then again next season, it's an interesting conversation, because you know that money is just going to get burned up almost instantly. It just gets consumed with payroll and overhead and all the things all the costs involved in keeping an orchestra on the stage, compared to an organ, which is an asset, a capital expenditure, and that organ lives on and is enjoyed. So there's a huge change in dynamic, and I'll talk about that a little bit. But over the last 11 years or so, I have been in about 20 of the organs that we have installed in churches required a fundraising campaign to fully fund the organ. And these campaigns range from $20,000 to $150,000. Altogether, cumulatively, there's been well over $1 million has been raised just to fund those 20 organs. I got inspired a couple of years ago to write out all this information that I know and what I had observed with all these successful campaigns. And the result is this book that I finally got finished early this year, and then that's what kind of led to putting together this little webinar with Adan. what I have tried to capture here is the key insights into the strategies that professional fundraisers use and that will always work. That's what we're going to talk about. So I'd like to get a quick sense of what you folks are thinking. Now some of you don't have your camera on, so you can or your microphone, but raise your hand or grunt if you think that fundraising for an organ is difficult or exceedingly challenging.
Oh yeah.
Definitely.
Okay.
Only because we've never done it before. So.
Okay, good. Okay, great.
For us, it's because of the having to spend $60,000 on unexpected repairs. Our people are fundraising weary.
Yes.
Plus you add in things like the bishop's appeal, and we do a lot of outreach, and our people, they're homeowners. So they empathize with the pastor when you say, oh yes, we have mold on our roof, the heating just broke. They understand that. They'll complain, but they'll do it.
Yeah.
This is not the time to say, oh, we want to buy a new organ. Yeah, they're not going to buy it. So that's why we're doing a lot of one-on-one contact with people.
Yeah.
And we've got about 10,000 in pledges, and also why I'm doing an application for grant money.
Very good.
That's my difficulty, is I'm empathetic to the people in the pew.
Well, and you're headed in the right direction too. So I think you'll see how to build on what you're already doing. So how many of you don't like asking for money?
All of us, probably.
Well, fair enough, but you can really learn to enjoy it. I'll just give you that little preview. How many of you think new organs are more expensive than ever?
I don't know.
I don't think I know. Well, I know what our renovation's going to cost. So.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to address that question too. You might be surprised at the data. But before I dive into this, are there any other specific questions any of you have on the top of your mind that you're hoping to get some further insight on?
I think for me, I wanted to kind of ask, what is the differences? Do I approach large donors versus small donors differently? Like, how do I approach those?
Yeah.
And are there specific times when to approach a large donor? How much, basically how much should be funded already before I start asking large donors? Things like that.
Okay, good. We'll cover that. Exactly. Good question. Okay. Any others? Anyone else?
I think just what are the different alternatives for fundraising? Obviously, bake sales are not going to cut it. So, what are the different alternatives we have? That's all.
Okay, very good. Well, let's go. There's 4 sections to this presentation. I'm going to give an overview of how organs get funded. There's quite a bit of data in here. It might be interesting, hopefully instructive. We'll do a quick overview of the principles of successful fundraising. But this is the theoretical view of it. And then I'll go into very methodical, detailed steps of how you work through a fundraising campaign that uses those principles. And then the last part will be just some actual campaigns, some quick overviews of some campaigns to give a sense of some of the projects that we've been involved with. So this is based on the organs that I've sold over the last 11 years. You can see that the green slices in this pie, a little bit more than half of the organs going into churches were funded through some kind of a donor. 5% were bequests from donors' estates, not a whole lot. 28% were major donors, an individual or 2 who funded the entire organ. those are wonderful people, and they sometimes will reveal themselves to the church, and then they come to me to get an organ. Sometimes the major donors call me directly and work with me to bring the project to the church. And it works well both ways. But 20% of all the church organs that we've done required a full-blown fundraising campaign. And these are the ones that all pretty much followed the path that I'm going to show you. Now, the title of this whole presentation is, organ fundraising is easy. And the reason I say that is because fundraising in the context of a church is some of the easiest fundraising to do. I came from a symphony orchestra previously, but that's in the arts world. That is some of the hardest fundraising to do compared to church. The reason for that is that churches are typically, church and religion are the first priority for donors, followed by the way, their university is kind of in second place. But church is very often number one. And you can see here that for the lower, the bottom segment of families with incomes under 100,000, 2/3 of their charitable giving goes to their church. And the average annual donation from that segment, from that income segment, is about $1,400 a year. When you move up to the 100 to 200,000 income level, there's still the majority of their charitable dollars go to the church. And that group averages about $2,300 a year. Then you get into higher income levels, you can see that the proportion of their giving to church drops significantly, but because they are giving a much larger amount in total, 23% of a much bigger pie is still a lot of money going to their church. In this case, an average of about $12,000 a year. And for the very high income families, which, some churches may not have any of these, but they are very, very substantial givers to church and religion, averaging over $60,000 a year. Now, this is data that was from a research that was done in 2005. That's quite some time ago. However, this kind of dynamic, donor philanthropic activity doesn't really vary a whole lot over the years. So the idea here that you see about the relative priority of giving for donors based on income level will be consistent. So one of the important things to understand is who's in your congregation and how do they fall into these income segments. So thinking about it, when I think about a church that needs a new organ, they want a new organ, they're going to need to do some fundraising probably, but they haven't, and they're lacking the funding for it. What's going on? I think there's what I've observed is there's principally two reasons. The first is just failure to ask. It just hasn't gotten started. They don't know how to organize the project, get it through all the hoops and hurdles that it has to go through within the church, and then actually do the campaign. Other reasons, of course, can be unsupportive leadership. You won't let it happen. Or just a general lack of interest in Oregon in the congregation. Those last two, unsupportive leadership and general lack of interest, I really can't help you with that. But if it's just a matter of not knowing how to organize the project, that's what we're going to talk about. Another situation that I have seen is a previous organ campaign that just failed to achieve the objective. So there's maybe a little bit of money sitting there, $5, $10, $15,000 at the most in an organ fund, but it's just, it's just collecting moss. That failed campaign most likely wasn't structured properly. Or it could have been just over aggressive. The capacity really wasn't there to support the project, and it was overestimated, and the whole thing just flopped. Again, I can't help you with that problem, but if it's a situation where it wasn't structured properly, that's what we're going to talk about, how to do it right. So I thought I would just talk a little bit about, for some of you who might be just thinking about a new organ, but really haven't looked into it yet. How much money are we talking about? How much money needs to be raised? So real quick rundown, a new digital organ, low end for a smaller 2 manual is around 30,000. A big 4 manual, totally decked out with lots of audio, can top out around 250. A custom digital will be in another level up from that, 100K to 400K, more or less, depending on who you're working with. A hybrid pipe organ, meaning a digital and pipes together, all new, can start around 100,000, and of course it can go very, very high, depending on how much pipe work you want to put into that project. A new pipe organ, a very small one, could be around 300,000, and of course pipe organs can go into the millions. And then one other category is a situation where you have a nice pipe organ, but it needs a new console. And that's an opportunity to put a digital console, a replacement console, and interface it to your existing pipes. Those make very nice organs. I just finished one last week in Idaho at a Lutheran church with a little Casaubon organ. It turned out beautiful. And that was about a $75,000 project. So that's kind of the starting point for a hybrid, and those can go up to into the low hundreds of thousands with a larger 4 manual organ. So looking at the question I asked earlier about what you thought, if any of you thought that organs are just more expensive than ever, I recently, I've been thinking about this for a long time, but I recently went in and pulled out a whole lot of data from my files to look at what a large 3 manual digital organ has cost over the years. And these were basically the actual cost to the church, all installed with all the audio, all these blue dots that you see. And you can see that, there's quite a spread up and down over the years, because some of them were a little bit fancier, some of them were slightly smaller 3 manuals, and so on. But then I took the actual prices that were paid in those years and applied the federal inflation adjustment factor to it. I got this off I think it was the Department of Labor or whatever, which federal department that tracks the inflation rates. And the blue line that you see is basically the average adjusted cost. Well, actually, what I should say is these blue dots are actually the inflation adjusted price. So a large 3 manual in 1980 or the late about 1987, 89 was about 170 to 200,000. I had 2 projects there. That's $170 to $200,000 in today's dollars. And then you can see how the numbers track. So today, right now, a brand new, and I use the Rogers pricing, 3 manual, big 3 manual with minimum audio and maximum audio is about 130 to 150,000. That's less than the equivalent dollars in 1988.
Mm.
And again, just looking at, just averaging it all out, the actual cost has trended slightly down, very slightly, enough to just say it's basically the same as 30 years ago. So when today we talk about, oh, a new organ is $100,000, and everybody says, wow, that's a lot of money. Well, in 1988, whoever walked in and said, well, your new organ is going to be 55,000 or 70,000 or whatever it was back then, it had the same impact.
Mm-hmm.
It was the same magnitude as now.
Mm-hmm.
So they did it then, and over the last 30 years, they've been raising money. So it's not, my point is, it's no harder now than in the past. We just have to approach it with the right idea and right process. So and then using the same data, I did a further analysis to look at the cost per stop and cost per voice on the organ. And the magenta line is the average of the cost per stop. Virtually the same across the last 30 years. That hasn't changed. However, the green line shows you the cost per voice, and that has dropped amazingly. And that's because, of course, back in the 80s, if you had a 55 stop organ, you had 55 voices. That was it. Over the years, with digital technology, digital organs have been able to provide a lot more voices so that you have multiple voices per stop. And these days, it's pretty much standard to have four voices per stop. So a 55 voice organ gives you over 200 voices, plus there's additional voices built in that are accessible. So there's just a plethora of tonal resource built into these organs. So you can see that the cost per voice has gone from around $2,500 down to about $400. So the value, what this is really saying is that the value in a new digital organ is much greater for the same money compared to 30 years ago. Just thought you might find that a little interesting. You got to calibrate your thinking about what you're talking about when you head into a fundraising program, and you're going to start talking to people and trying to explain why you're raising all this money. So just to give a little context for what I'm going to show you, the campaigns that we've worked with generally have ranged from about 30,000 to 150,000, and these are short-term campaigns. They're finished in a matter of weeks, and these budget amounts, by the way, were all for digital organs. None of this has been for a pipe organ. That's a whole lot bigger budget, typically, and a different way of organizing it. The budgets over 150,000 are often funded by a major donor. The larger ones typically have a major donor driving them, or a small group of donors. And that would be especially true for a pipe organ. So now let's do a quick run through of the principles of fundraising in general. There's four things that are needed: leadership, focus, a plan, and a strategy. And I'll give just a little bit more detail about that. In the leadership box, somebody has to provide strong leadership for the campaign. If the pastor will do that and is willing to do that and capable, that's a huge plus, because he is the leader of the congregation to begin with. And if he gets behind it, that gets things moving pretty quickly. But it doesn't have to be the pastor. A board chair or a congregational president is a strong second. And after that, an organ committee chair is the next usual suspect. And lack of pastoral or music director support will generally require that whoever the campaign chair is needs to be a fairly strong and very vocal advocate for the organ. I've seen both where the pastor is supportive, but then there's a good chair, and that works nice because the pastor will support it. I've also seen campaigns where the pastor was very resistant, but the campaign had a bulldozer for a chair, and they got it done anyway. The focus aspect of the fundraising campaign is, of course, the organ, but it's important that the focus be on what you're going to do. It cannot be vague or amorphous or undefined. If it's on a new digital organ, you need to explain the existing organ is done, it's worn out, we need to replace. It's time to replace. That happens every 30 to 40 years. That's normal. They did it 30, 40 years ago. It's our turn now to do it again. A new pipe organ console, pipe organ consoles have to be rebuilt every 40 to 50 years. That's normal. And if you want to do the hybrid thing and add a new digital console, there's a good argument there, or a good explanation about the economics of that and how it expands the pipe organ and so on and so forth. And we can talk about that later. The plan, this is where you go to the congregation and you explain and show them very explicitly what has been decided and what's going to happen. This is our new organ. The committee has reviewed things, that checked everything out, and this is the decision of the organ that we're getting. You can show it, have posters, brochures, whatever. Of course, having made that decision, you'll know what the budget needs to be. It's a very specific. It's a specific amount. You can tell the congregation what the goal is, and then talk about how this is going to enhance worship and the benefits, if anybody doesn't know. And the whole process there is to create anticipation and excitement. That's what will get people emotionally engaged to support, and let them know when it's going to happen. There's a timeline. The organ is coming this summer, or we'll have it in time for Christmas. Those kinds of things that will get people excited. It needs a deadline. We got to get this done. And then the strategy. This is where some good planning comes in as to how you will achieve the goal that's been set, and the various components of how that might get funded: a major or lead donor, key donors, congregational support, other sources, etc. And then how the campaign gets implemented. And I'll talk about how you get it launched and everything involved. So now let's get into the actual mechanics of actually doing this. I've broken it into 6 steps that I can define it in 6 discrete steps. The initial organizing, creating the case for the new organ, selecting the new organ, planning for your success, launching the campaign, and then completing the campaign. So for those of you who don't like asking for money, I just put the little footnote here. Note that only one step in this whole process involves asking for the dollars. Everything else is the planning, the strategizing, and figuring out that you can make this successful. And then even in step 5, where you're asking for the money, you don't necessarily have to ask for it. You can organize people and the campaign so that the right people are asking, and I'm going to talk about that in much more detail. So organizing. This is where the organ champion needs to be identified. The person that's really going to lead the campaign, and maybe that's the pastor. Most often, though, it is not. And when it's not, you definitely want to get the pastor on board. You need to go through whatever protocols exist in your church to actually get approval to organize the committee and start working on the project, and then recruit the committee. What I've observed with all the various campaigns I've worked with, that champion is usually not the organist, but it is the person who chairs the organ committee, and sometimes it is a lead donor or a major donor, the one who's really putting the most money in, and then putting their arms around other people's shoulders and saying, match me on this. That gets a lot done. Creating the case for the new organ. You want to look at the history and importance of the organ in your church music program. Sometimes that goes way back. Former donors, the last time a big campaign was done. These are all important details. The condition of the current organ needs to be explained, why it's inadequate or it's failing, or what's the problem? Why do we have to do this now? And the conclusion is a new organ is needed, or in the case of a pipe organ, it's a rebuild or a new console. But it's the same logic that builds up to justifying and explaining why we need to raise all this money. But creating your case is simply about giving people reasons to support the new organ. This is the intellectual part. It's the logical part of why we need to do this. Then the committee goes to work selecting what the new organ is going to be. This is very important. It needs to be done first. If the committee is not knowledgeable about organs, they don't have to be. But if they're not, then take some time to educate them on the options. Obviously, you need to define your requirements for what the new organ needs to do, however you want to articulate that and express that. Audition your possibilities with various providers, builders, manufacturers. Focus the options down to one or two and get proposals, and then make the selection. And that, of course, based on the proposal you select, that will set the budget. By the way, I didn't mention this earlier, but this book that you see in the slide and that I'm holding, I just finished this a couple months ago, and if you would like to get a copy of it, I'll mail it to you. And I'll just, before we get done here, I'll tell you how to get in touch with me, and I'll just mail you a copy of it. But everything I'm telling you is in the book in even more detail. I just mentioned this very briefly earlier, but one mistake that I have seen, and I've actually redirected a few committees, but I've actually seen it done, is a church or a committee that tries to raise money for an organ without specifying what it is. We're just raising money for an organ, for a new organ. It doesn't work. It lacks a vision of what this is going to be. And it also kind of telegraphs that we don't know where this is going. We don't know how much we can raise. We don't know how long this is going to take. And guess what happens? It takes forever and doesn't raise enough. That's a failed campaign. And approaching it from this perspective is pretty much guaranteed to fail. So follow the steps. Make the plan, choose the organ, have the budget, and go for it. Giving is emotional. I kind of mentioned that a couple of times briefly. So people need to get excited about what it is that we're getting, and maybe even hear it. So once it starts to feel real and imminent, that's when people can get excited. So planning for success. This is a little bit of work. You need to create a gift plan. We have our goal, it's 50,000, 80,000, 120, whatever that number is. How are we going to achieve that? I will show you an example on the next slide. But in the process of creating this gift plan, you are able to evaluate the capacity of your congregation to actually reach the goal. And you may discover that you don't really have the capacity for the number that you have in mind. But that's your warning, that's your opportunity to redirect, reassess your needs, your wants, scale it down appropriately, and then approach it again with a goal that you determine is achievable. Then there's the planning involved with the campaign structure. Do you have a lead donor or some major donors? And is it Therese, you said?
Yes.
I
Therese.
think, yeah, you're essentially in your silent phase right now, talking to key donors.
Right.
So you're
Right.
you're in the first phase of the campaign. You haven't gone public, but you're
Right.
lining up some significant support. And then I'll show you what to do after that.
Great.
So a challenge gift is another strategy for structuring the campaign. And then, of course, when to launch is another thing that you have to think about, is when is the right timing to do this? You know, if you've just been through, you know, 2 other campaigns for the air conditioning and, you know, the windows or whatever, and and people are campaign weary, you got to wait a little bit. So that's just realistic. So here's what a gifting plan looks like. You set up gift levels starting with a high amount that you think there is at least 1 or 2 donors in the church that are capable of that level of a gift. And then generally each level steps down by about half from that top level, getting down to, you know, a low end of, you know, $100, you know, maybe $200, somewhere around there. And then you start speculating what's our potential, or how many gifts do we need at each of those levels to achieve the total. So you see the number of gifts here is the number of gifts we need to get. These are the total, the totals column is the total amount for that gifting level, and then the cumulative total over here is all of them together. So this is a relatively modest plan that is trying to raise about $40,000. And the top level gift is going to be somewhere between, usually between 10 and 20% of the total amount raised. And you may have, you know, 1 or 2 at that level. Now you'll need more than, so for instance, if you're looking to get 3 gifts, in this case here at $1,500, you need more than 3 prospects to go after. You need to kind of identify a few more, you know, 2 to 3 times the number of those gifts that you need, just as a rule of thumb. Now, I don't remember if I get into too much detail, but I'll just say that these higher gifting levels, usually from 1,000 on up, are gifts that are solicited. So this is the silent phase. These are where you're talking to people privately to get their commitment or their pledge. The gifts under $1,000, those will be solicited with letters and announcements from the pulpit and so on. That's not stuff you go spending a lot of time asking for. But the larger gifts are the ones that you really want to sit down face to face, explain the case, explain why this is going to be so wonderful for the church, whoever's doing it, not you necessarily. I will talk about how to do that in a minute. And you get those gifts committed that way. So launching the campaign, silent phase was what I was just talking about. It's the personal asks for the larger donations. And this is where you want to identify the best persons to talk to the various prospects for those gifts. So if your campaign chair is one of the big donors, he or she is the perfect person to sit down and ask for some of those gifts, because he or she's already put down $5,000-$10,000, and it's real easy to say, would you consider joining me on this or matching me in this campaign? And that usually gets things moving pretty quick. So that's the silent phase. Get those larger commitments committed. The public phase, announce it. There's a big focus on it. Maybe during a church service, maybe during a special event. Make the campaign visible. Have a poster in the narthex. Here's an example of a poster that I've given some of my customers to use. Shows a picture of the organ. It's got the goal thermometer, so that they can track the performance. They can see, oh wow, we're up to 70%. We're almost, we're getting there. 90%, we're almost done. The excitement really builds, and let me tell you, that happens in a matter of weeks. So it is exciting for the congregation. Put information on the website. You might even consider a dedicated website just for the campaign that has a lot of in-depth information about the new organ. And if it's, have recordings. If it's a nice big digital organ, you can get recordings of that same model of organ in other churches. Get people excited. Obviously, you want to do updates at church services and in the newsletter as appropriate. And then, of course, appeal. I mentioned letters. That's where you want to get a letter out to every congregation, to every member in the congregation, soliciting those smaller gifts. Events can be used. I worked with one church that raised $75,000. No big donors in that church. It was all smaller, modest. The largest donations were modest, and they got down to about the last 10,000 they needed to raise, and they did a church talent show. And one of the guys in the congregation was he was a very good MC, and they just did every trick in the book. They did silent auction. They had people bidding for this and that, and members getting up and performing and just having a lot of fun. And they raised, and it ended with a that thing I forget what they called it, where they dumped ice water on somebody's head. The pastor got dunked, and they raised a lot of money just to pour ice water on the pastor's head. That wasn't too nice, I thought, but it worked. So then the last step is completing the campaign. You've reached the goal, but you're not done yet, because now you need to announce we've done it. The new organ is coming. Start building the anticipation for that. And then, of course, when the organ arrives and it's installed, you want to properly celebrate that and certainly honor the donors, everyone who participated, and especially any major donors. And organ dedication concerts often a part of that too. I'll say one more thing, just going back here to the gift chart. Don't underestimate the smaller gifts, the $100, even the $50, or gifts down in that range. They don't add up very fast. You need a lot of those to amount to as much, even get close to what 1 or 2 large donations bring in. But the importance of those smaller gifts is engagement. The person who gives you $100 feels emotionally attached to that as much as the person that gave you 5,000. It's as big a deal, maybe a bigger deal, to the $100 donor as the $5,000 or $10,000 donor. They are invested in the organ, and they feel ownership, and they feel a part of it. And of course, it takes a lot of $100 gifts to add to the campaign, but every one of those people is invested and feeling proud about the project. So don't ignore them. Recognize them, honor them, however it feels appropriate. You might give them, a little a memorial thing or memorable thing for their gift, but that you get a lot of goodwill for the effort that goes into that. So I'm going to just run through very quickly just a random selection of some of the campaigns we've worked with over the last 10 years. Denominations included here are Episcopal, Catholic, Lutheran, Methodist, Baptist, UCC, and SDA. So it's quite a broad range. I might say too that not a lot of Catholic organs involve campaigns. They often have capital funds available, but we have done some. In fact, the organ that I'm finishing up this week was a smaller, about a $40,000 campaign that the congregation, they went out to the congregation. The pastor announced it. He led off with it because he's retiring. This is the one I mentioned earlier before some of you got on the call. The pastor's retiring, and this is he wants to leave the church with this new organ before he leaves. So that campaign was done in about 4 weeks. I'm just using city names here so I can remember who these are. This little 2-manual organ, we did this just last year, right in the middle of the pandemic. When they came back into their church after being shut down for a year, they discovered that their old little digital organ had pretty much fallen apart. It sat there and baked in 120 degrees for a year, and it wasn't in very good shape to begin with. So that was the catalyst to just do something new. And the pastor pulled this one together at our very first little committee meeting. He announced that he had someone in the church that was putting up 50%. We're going to match everyone 50%. So they only had to raise about $10,000. And the committee was quite energized. They had broad support. They had this money raised in 3 weeks. Actually, less than 3 weeks. This is an organ that's actually just in process. They just completed the fundraising in December. Again, this was a situation where about a 30-year-old digital organ that's starting to get flaky, and the music director had talked to me, and he wanted to really upgrade and go fancy. So he wanted me to quote him the fanciest 3-manual we could give them, because they have a nice music program. He wanted something even better than what they have now. So that worked out to be about $200,000. The day that he said something in the church service that we need to do something about our organ, after the service, a lady came up to him that he didn't know and said, "How much is it going to cost?" And he told her 200. She said, "I'll give you 100 if you can get it matched before the end of the year." And they did, just like that. So sometimes, I mean, that it's a rich church, a lot of retired. It's a rich retiree area, and that's just how it went. That's unusual. It's a little unusual. This one was pretty typical. Existing pipe organ, aging, about 50 years old, console falling apart. And they had a little organ fund that had just kind of trickled in. Some people, left some money to the church, kind of thing. Very small amount, about $6,000. And the music director finally decided they had to do something. He was just, couldn't play the organ. So we budgeted the thing out for him. They announced it, and he had money committed instantly. That got them very close to their goal. They worked on it for a couple more weeks and got this thing done. Turned out, it's a nice little hybrid. Turned out very nice. This is a Catholic church in Fresno that had an older Wicks pipe organ. One of the Catholic churches that needed to do some fundraising. I wasn't even very close to this one, but one of the interesting things that they did was to solicit every family in the parish. And it took them a little while. It went kind of slow by what I'm used to, but they raised the money, and we basically resurrected their pipe organ because it was getting unplayable. The console was in such bad shape. This was another hybrid organ, an existing Moeller organ with another very rickety console. And the church was coming up on their 60th anniversary, and the pastor came to me and said, I think, it's our 60th anniversary. I'm pretty sure I could raise $60,000. What could you do for $60,000? So I had a pre-owned console that just fit into that budget very nicely. And he used that as the catalyst, and the whole thing came together. This organ came out. We really brought this Moeller alive. Like it was really very underpowered for this large sanctuary that had grown since the organ was actually put in it. This is an example of a church that tried to raise money for an organ, and they had 80,000 in mind, but they had two things going against them. They didn't organize the campaign right. I pleaded with them to rethink how they were doing it, and they said, no, we just, this is how we need to do it. So they went ahead, and their other hurdle or impediment was a very ambivalent pastor. So they were just getting no support from the leadership, and even the church council was just, the trustees just weren't really very supportive for the whole thing. So it was the music director and his wife and a couple of people trying to drive this thing, and this went on for about 3 years, and they just kind of stalled out at about $37,000. Originally thinking they needed to raise 80. So I was talking to them all through this, and the organ that you see here is the one they wanted. That's the one they wanted to get, and I just happened to have it, and it'd been sitting around longer than I like organs sitting around. So I said, I'm going to make you a deal. I can do this for a little bit less than what you originally had in mind, but you're going to have to raise some money to get there, because I can't do it for what you have. And so we came up with the budget, and that delta, whatever that is, about 15,000 or so. I said, you go out to the congregation and tell them X, Y, Z, just like I had told them originally. I say, this is we can get this organ. We only need to raise $15,000. They had that thing done in no time, because they finally came back with the idea, the vision for what they were going to get. And this was replacing a very dying older electronic organ. So this was just it turned out beautiful, and everybody's very happy, of course, but it took 3 years, a little longer than it should. This is another project where the church had an existing pipe organ, putting a little 2-manual console just about ready to drop over dead. And they wanted to really upgrade to a big 3-manual, a little higher end budget. And again, a very ambivalent pastor that almost refused to talk about the project in church. The chair would ask him to make an announcement, and he would just forget to do it. So very frustrating. But the gentleman who was leading the thing, he didn't take no for an answer. And he drove, and he had very, very good committee too. So they very energetic. They just drove the thing, and it took about 4 months, but they raised the money and seriously upgraded their Chantz organ. Just another typical campaign, replacing an old. This was replacing a 40-year-old analog digital organ that was, just obviously end of life. It was still sort of working, but not well. And so it's time to do it. There wasn't a huge argument there. Good, strong campaign chair, and the pastor was very supportive, and they worked out, basically the church board said they would match whatever was raised from the capital funds. So this thing got done pretty quickly. And close to home, in Adan's AGO chapter area, this is the Methodist Church in Simi Valley, with a little Moeller Artiste organ, about 5 ranks, about as small as they come. And this little 5-rank organ served this church for 30 years. And typical story, the console had to go. So they got a little committee together. They got very excited, and in the first meeting, my first meeting with the committee, laying out this organ that they had in mind, one of the old ladies on the committee said, "I'll match 50%, dollar for dollar, what gets raised." So this thing, they raised a very good amount of money in 3 weeks. Just amazing. So I'm just going to talk briefly about how I work with committees. So those of you who are in others outside of California, you might talk to your organ supplier about any of these ideas. Obviously, I work with the organ committee to plan the organ, but also to coach them on how to organize this campaign. You can get that from my book. You don't need to talk to your supplier about that. But printed collateral, it's nice to have stuff to hand out that shows the organ. One-on-one presentations for key donors. You might include your organ supplier, who can really talk about how exciting the organ is. A field trip to audition a similar organ if you need to do that, certainly for the committee, if you haven't made that decision already. And then congregational presentations. I also offer to create a dedicated website that just focuses on the organ campaign and provides a little bit more in-depth material about the organ and recordings, stuff like that I mentioned earlier. So the first step, if you haven't organized anything, the first step is a conversation to get some people together in the church, or get a supplier and just have that conversation about what your dream is, what you have in mind. Get the information, understand what your options are, and the budgeting, so you can scope out your fundraising potential. So that's the end of the structured material. I hope I didn't fly through that too fast. But again, if you want to get a copy of this book, actually, let me give you my email address right now, so you can just email me your address, and I will mail you the copy. My email is nelson@churchkeyboard.com. And I'll be happy to just send that off to you. And just FYI, who's in Santa Barbara? Your name's not showing.
Aaron.
Oh, Aaron, you're here. Oh, Aaron, hi. Well, you played this organ.
Yes, I did.
Yeah. So yeah, I thought I would end with a really pretty picture. So for the rest of you, this is a custom organ that we finished last year in Santa Barbara, and this picture was kind of notable because the gentleman from this was built. This is a custom Monarch from the Global Organ Group. So the CEO and international sales manager were visiting to see it, and then the church folks joined us. The short lady on the left is Bitsy Bacon. You gotta love that name. She was on the organ committee and probably the most enthusiastic about this, and I'm sure she was one of the good donors for it too. So any questions? I'm open for questions now. I guess I did such a good job. There's no questions. Please come up with something.
I got several, because it just makes me think the way at Holy Family, the structure there that we have is all Catholic churches have church councils, and I feel like that's the group I need to really rope in or get representatives from the choir or some advocates in that group. Is that has that been your experiences with Catholic churches, Nelson?
Honestly, with Catholic churches, I usually work fairly high level, even when they need to fundraise, because like I said earlier, the majority of Catholic churches have capital funds, or someone has just given the money, and now they're out to get it done.
Mm-hmm.
So that all preceded, anything we do. But when they do the funding campaign, I've usually been more either tied into the priest or the deacon.
Mm.
I've never engaged with any of the groups because they sort of they handle them, because I'm sort of the outsider. But from your perspective, being the insider, I don't think that would hurt to have those relationships and connections, because you know them, they know you.
Mm-hmm.
And I can talk to you more about maybe what you want to say to them.
Yeah, because we don't have any kind of organ committee or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's something that needs to be established alongside, especially as once we get the new pastors and see how far we can go with this new hybrid that I want to have.
Yes, and just so the rest of you know what Dan, I'm sorry, and I have been talking about is adding pipes to his large 4-manual organ. The organ is perfectly fine. I mean, it's a good organ, but pipes would enrich it quite a bit, and certainly the visual aspect of that would be rather stunning. So we have already mapped out a design and a spec for adding some pipes, and I've been budgeting it. It's going to be in the $300,000 range. So that's a big chunk of money to raise. But your church, I mean, the organ that Dan has was given by a single donor. In fact, he has 2 organs, both given at the same time by one donor. So that's the history there. I think raising a bunch of money to add to that is not unrealistic, given the money that's been swirling around in your church. So again, it's just a matter of how we present this. And of course, the first thing we need to do is sit down and talk with your new priest when he gets there. So we'll be talking about that.
Yeah, we're just at the heels of a $9 million or $10 million capital campaign for a new parish center.
Mhm.
And it's always something, right? Like you said earlier before the meeting started, it's a new parking lot or whatever, something getting in the way. It's not the right time, and I've been getting that for the last couple of years.
Well, you're finishing a big campaign.
We're finishing a big campaign, and so
Yeah.
we thankfully so we're happy to get it. Part of the funds are actually for this campaign is also a new music building for the high school, so it's
Wow.
it's a really good thing. But yeah, so we'll be in touch.
Carla, I think you had your hand.
Yeah, I was wondering, Nelson, if you had any experience working with a broader community around a church or a parish. For example, we are the second oldest parish in the city of Baton Rouge. So a lot of people who live in Baton Rouge now have some connection to this parish. Their parents got married, they made their first communion there. And a lot of people, when I talk to them and I tell them I'm the choir director at St. Agnes, they will tell me that, oh, I have this connection to it. And I'm wondering if you had any experience with that, or even someone who just, a group or working with people in the community who just like organs and want to support, the existence of this great instrument.
Sure. I don't have any direct examples of that, but given what you described, it sounds like there is opportunity to go out to the community, maybe multiple places, some groups, I know that a lot of cities have organizations that just raise money for and then ultimately give grants for various projects. You know, new sports equipment for the high school. You know, so forth and so on, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That would be a group to talk to and say, can we submit a grant application for X amount? And then if there is a you know, a Rotary Club or a women's club or some organization like that in the city that obviously probably has lots of connections, and those organizations tend to like to raise money to fund things in the community too. You can leverage them. Here in LA, there's one Rotary Club out in a distant city that raises money. One of the members there is an AGO member, and he has gotten them organized to raise money to fund scholarships to piano students who want to take organ lessons. And the AGO has been matching that money that the Rotary Club raises. So there's just those places that, you know, you make the connection and see if the interest is there, and then wind them up if they want to get involved. And you got lots of history, so there's, you know, talk about the history.
Yeah. This is it's a significantly historic organ, we think, at least. It's one of the oldest, and I've actually thought about going to the Historical Preservation Society.
Oh, that too.
For something like that. Yeah.
Yes, all good stuff. Erin, are you raising your hand?
So it sounds like I'm sort of in a similar position as you. Is it Adan?
Don, yeah.
Adan, hi. I feel like I've been treading water now for like 5 or 6 years, waiting for the right moment. And we just finished a $1 million renovation campaign that we went under during the pandemic. And it seems like the pandemic sort of, you know, sparked everybody's interest into audio upgrades and wiring and all this type of thing. So we did a major sanctuary renovation that definitely ended up taking precedence, and it was very needed too. But so I think I have twofold question. One is sort of related. How, you know, now that we're done and we finally called a pastor after being in a 3-year interim process, that was very painful for the church. And so how do you, I know maybe it's a sort of a arbitrary question, but you know, it's hard to gauge what time is the right time, you know. And then, you know, for in the Presbyterian Church, which is what I work for, you know, you have some kind of key player elders that are then getting rotated off the leadership that would be very influential to have, but they're leaving in a few short weeks. And so I feel sort of wedged in between this kind of need to get this on the radar and start moving forward to it, and also to be sensitive to, as you said, donor burnout. So how to balance that, I think that's my first thing. And then Nelson, my second question is, I guess I wasn't aware, and maybe I'm unclear, that you're willing to do consults and visitations for any type of consult, even if it's not Johannes or Rogers. I know that that's primarily where your interest is, but I'm wondering if that's something that you do as well, as far as your affiliation with AGO goes.
This is actually completely independent of AGO. So
okay.
Yeah, I wrote the book. I organized all this information just because I have had I've had experience raising money in a difficult situation, and then working with churches and seeing how easy it was to raise money for an organ. I thought, I understand what's going on here, and I'd just like to share this with anyone who needs it. Locally, obviously, I get involved with churches that are talking to me about getting an organ, and that's cool. But I'd certainly be happy to talk to you further on a more broad basis of how to get things organized. Because I understand what I heard what you said about just trying to get the right, get things coalesced there to move forward. That is, and you're at an inflection point here with people coming and going, new pastor and all that. It's a little tricky, but it's the opportunity. You got to start sometime, basically. And I think from what you just said, what struck me was, even though you might have some elders that are rotating off session, it might be useful to look at them and say, is one of those people the real champion to enlist to get this organized, even though they're not on session going forward. So that would be one thing to look at and talk about. But then the rest of, and the other early part of the, early stages of the discussion is just what is the plan for the organ? What I know you need to just replace the console basically, but there's a lot of ways to do that. And you got to look at all those options and price them out. And then somewhere in there is a good fit.
Yeah. Is anywhere in your book, do you talk about like how to talk to money? Because I sort of have this running joke with everyone I know. It's like, I'm the talent, but don't ever make me talk to somebody with a checkbook because they walk. I just don't have that gift. So
yeah, no, and you don't have to. But yes, one of the appendices in the book is a very detailed overview of different kinds of givers, and this is actually borrowed material. There's a couple of people, I forget their name, it's in the book, but there's a couple of people that wrote a whole book about the 7 giving styles. It is fascinating material, and it's broadly used in the fundraising world now, especially for the major gifts. But it goes into detail about how you approach, how you talk to each of those types of givers, and they're pretty easy to figure out what pot they fall into. And then I have added some additional. I highlighted the stuff that I added to those points that bring it down more specific to talking about a new organ to that type of donor. So, and I experienced some of this when I was working at the symphony and raising some fairly, large major gifts. My typical major donors each year were in the $100,000 range. Doesn't take too many of those to pay for an organ, but it takes a lot of those to pay for an orchestra. So that was a little daunting, but in the context of an organ, it just seems so easy. But I did learn working with these major donors. I saw all these different styles in action, and it was fascinating. And then it was because once you had that understanding, once I had that understanding of, this is the kind of person I'm talking to, I knew how to what to say and what not to say, because some things you might say would just scare them or offend them as a donor. So you can't just talk to a big donor is not just a big donor. They come in all these different flavors with a different motivation. It really goes back to their motivation for supporting the project, and then you tie into that and you reinforce their motivation, and you don't throw stuff at them that doesn't relate or might even just scare them. For instance, like a donor, I'll give you a perfect example. The very very good person who just wants to support because it's the right thing to do. It's a good thing. They don't want the spotlight, and they even maybe want to be anonymous. You don't start talking about how you're going to, shower attention on them, and how you're going to celebrate them, and pull them up on stage, put the spotlight. That freaks them out. They're giving the money because it's the right thing to do. They love the result. They don't want any glory out of it. Those are wonderful people, but you got to treat them that way. and respect that. So that particular appendice has all these little kinds of hints and ideas for how to deal with different kinds of donors. It's really my favorite part of the whole thing.
Would you mind sharing that whatever 7 Habits of Highly Effective Fundraisers or whatever that book is that you mentioned? I think it might be of interest
Actually, it's
to our finance committee. Yeah.
actually it's called the book that this is all taken from is called The 7 Faces of Philanthropy: A New Approach to Cultivating Major Donors. Russ Allen Prince and Karen Maru File. This book grew out of a 1994 research study that they did about donor motivations, and it's become pretty much Bible material for professional fundraisers.
The 7, I'm sorry, I missed all that, Nelson.
The 7 Faces of Philanthropy.
Okay,
Yeah, you'll find it on Amazon.
thank you.
But I give the Cliff Notes version is in here. So
Okay.
So any more questions? Very good.
Yeah.
Just a reminder, email me if you haven't already, and I'll send you the book if you want it. And thank you all for being here. This was, I hope this was useful. It was certainly fun for me.
Thank you so much, Nelson.
Thank
Let's
you.
all give him
Thank
thanks.
you.
Thank you.
Thank
Everybody,
you.
Thank you all for
Thank
coming.
you.
We have more events for the Ventura AGO, but everyone have a great rest of your day. Thank you, Nelson, for being here with us. And you'll be able to find this video on our Ventura AGO YouTube page. Take
Thank
care.
you.
Very good.